Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, State and Federal Benefits Workshop. I am Sandy Irwin, the Director of Family Supports here at the St. Louis ARC. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bhavik Patel. I'll have him introduce himself and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Sandy. Hi, everyone. My name is Bhavik Patel. I'm an attorney over at Sandberg Phoenix and do a lot of special needs planning. And today we're going to talk about public benefits. To be able to talk about every aspect of public benefits would be a very long workshop. But my hope today is to get you sort of the basics, the understanding of how to become eligible, what types of benefits there are, how to make sure you keep those benefits, and how we don't accidentally lose those benefits for our loved ones. Also, I tend to, when I do these presentations, which I've been doing for over 15 years with the ARC, and enjoy sharing this information with you all. I want to say I kind of keep it generally pretty conversational, and I instead of saying a child with a disability or a loved one with special needs, I'm just going to refer to that individual as Joey, just to kind of personalize it a little bit and make the conversation be a little bit more of a flow. If you do need to get a hold of me, you can give me a call. That's my direct number, and that's my email address. Anybody that listens to any of these presentations, I'm always going to be more than happy to meet with and talk to about your personal situation and get you as much information as I can, truly customized for you. I can't really do that in a presentation, but I am more than happy to do that on a one-on-one basis. All you have to do is just call or email me. So with that said, most of my presentation is going to be about public funds, but I do want to talk about sort of private funding for what it's worth. And private funding really just is the concept of how much money you are going to be able to leave for Joey, whether it's through your efforts and savings and retirement planning and your inheritance that you're going to leave for Joey, um, or whether it's life insurance. I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm not a financial planner. I'm a special needs planning attorney, but I did want you to know that there's a lot of private funding options to be able to make sure there's enough money available for Joey at the best of your level, whether that's, like I said, insurance, if it's just savings, so on and so forth. And I'm going to talk a lot about public funds, what types there are available. And then we'll get into avoiding pitfalls. And what I mean by avoiding pitfalls, what do you want to make sure isn't happening to avoid losing those public benefits? If we have more time, we'll get into some other things, but those are the core of today's presentation. The importance of public funds. I mean, these are aid. This is money that is set aside by our federal government and state governments to be used for people with special needs. These funds are meant to be used, and there's no reason to avoid taking full advantage of them. With a little planning, those funds can go a long ways for Joey and to really help supplement Joey's path towards living the best life he can. So it's really important that I think for anyone that is struggling with whether they should get public funds, not public funds, and philosophical differences there, and all those types of things. I wanted to share my personal observation that that's what these funds are for. In essence, you have helped fund these programs, and they're there for Joey. So I would say take advantage of them when you can, or if it's appropriate for you to take advantage of. So let me kind of divide public benefits in two broad categories. I would base them on the categories of benefits not based on financial need and those benefits based on financial need. It's a really good way to kind of categorize the public benefits that are out there in two distinct categories. The ones not based on financial need are those that are like Social Security, good old fashioned Social Security, or Medicare or special education programs. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you may be entitled to those benefits. It's the same one when I get older and retire, I could get Social Security or I can get Medicare. This is the type of benefit we're talking about. But it doesn't only apply to me when I get older. There is potential ways for Joey to benefit from those. The other category is those that are based on financial need. The most common ones are the first two on that list: SSI, otherwise drawn out as supplemental security income, and Medicaid. These are two types of benefits that can be hugely impactful for Joey's future. And they are based completely on financial need based analysis, which we will talk about here shortly. Other ones that I won't really talk through today are things like food stamps or legal aid or utility payment assistance, and then housing subsidies or Section 8 housing or HUD. We won't really talk about those. We're going to focus on actually SSI and Medicaid. And we'll also talk a little bit about Medicare and Social Security, and in particular, Social Security disability income, which is referred to as SSDI. And it's very important to understand, and I don't know why they use the same, almost same acronyms, but SSDI and SSI are very unique to each other, very different. And they often get confused when people talk about benefits. And I hope to share those sort of distinctions so that you can sort of keep them straight when you are talking through this about you and your family. So we'll start with supplemental security income, or SSI. SSI is a federal program that's administered by each state, and it's based on two very important elements. We must show evidence of two things. We call it a two-pronged test. The first of these prongs is the sufficient evidence of disability. There's not a lot you can do on this piece. This is a medical evidence type of evaluation and determination. When you go through the application process, they will ask for access to medical records, and they will evaluate and they will know if it's sufficient evidence or not. For anyone that is hesitant on a diagnosis of some sort, it would be that hesitancy that I have seen that might cause prevention to establish sufficient evidence of disability. But generally, the medical records have a diagnosis, then we generally pass that level of evidence for the disability prong. The second prong is financial need. And we'll talk a little bit more about financial need here in a second. But what is SSI intended to be used for? This is very important as well. It is for the absolute core essentials. It is for Joey's food and Joey's shelter needs. Nothing more. So if Joey receives SSI money and he's using it for the movies one day, or For travel, in some instances, you could run into a problem if ever audited and lose or get the benefit suspended. So I want you to walk away today in general sense. Think of SSI to be used for food and shelter and limit it to food and shelter. And it's capped at a dollar amount anyway, so you probably aren't going to exceed. You won't have excess SSI money for anything else, really, anyways, if you just allocate it towards the food and shelter part. Now, this next part is probably the most important thing I can share with you that we always often meet with families, and there's a lot of confusion to what it is. In terms of eligibility for financial need, there are two tests that they look at. The first test is called the resource test. And then the subsequent thing they look at is the income test. There's this kind of a silly analogy that I give everybody. But here's how I analogize these two tests and how they work together for SSI eligibility purposes. Think of being in front of a locked door. And you have to pass the resource test to be able to unlock the door. And if the door is locked, it can never be opened. But if it's unlocked, there's a way to open the door. And then they go subsequently to the income test to kind of determine how wide the door is going to be open. But if you can't ever unlock the door, nothing else matters. So that is the most important thing I want you to take away here, is that you at all times need to ensure that Joey is passing the resource test to be eligible for SSI purposes. And then I'm going to share what these tests are as we go right now. Okay, so what is the resource test? The first thing I always tell people is, well, when you have a test that's called the resource test, the first question that comes to my mind is, well, what is a resource? And so the best way I could describe what a resource is I want you to think of everything as a resource. Anything that can be converted to cash is what I want you to start with in thinking about a resource. And then later on, I'm going to talk to you about some exceptions or some carve-outs that don't count as a resource. But I want you to start with everything and anything that Joey owns is a resource. Another very important statement here is, whose resource are we talking about? Well, it depends on how old Joey is. If Joey is a minor, and that means under the age of 18, they are going to not only look at Joey's assets or resources, but also Joey's mom and dad, regardless of whether mom and dad are divorced or not. They will look at all the resources to see if the resource test has been passed. Well, what exactly is the rule? The rule is, if Joey or Joey's parents, if Joey's under the age of 18, have resources that exceed $2,000 on the first day of the calendar month in which Joey applies, then you will not pass the resource test, which means the door to benefits stays locked until those resources have been spent down to below that $2,000 number. Now, there's another number on the screen that's called another number for Medicaid purposes. I'll talk more about the benefit later, but I'll go ahead and put here that the resource limits for Medicaid is $5,909. It's a pretty low threshold, especially if Joey's under the age of 18. Once Joey is over the age of 18, depending on whether you proactively plan, this could be a very attainable threshold to meet. In other words, you could make sure Joey doesn't have resources in his name, especially if he can't work or anything. And these are some of the pitfalls I'll get to later on in the presentation. Earlier, I said everything is a resource. And I'm going to start talking a little bit about what to carve out of that. But if it's something that's very important to note is if you qualify for SSI, you're going to qualify for Medicaid. So that's why I'm kind of spending all the time talking about SSI, because it's a harder threshold to meet. And in my mind, I would not focus on the difference between $2,000 and $5,909 between SSI and Medicaid. I would only, even though it's not accurate, I would only remember the $2,000 number. That's the only number I would think about when you're talking about public benefit eligibility, because it's the safer way to do it. What is not a resource is assets that the beneficiary does not have a legal right to demand. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's really where the concept of special needs trust comes in. So I said everything is a resource, but then I said I would talk to you about carve outs, exempt resources, assets Joey could own that will not disqualify him from public benefit eligibility. And in particular, when I say public benefit eligibility, I'm in the category where I'm talking about financial need based. So Medicaid and SSI. Those are the two I'm talking about. So Joey could own a home. As long as he's living in it, that home will be excluded as an exempt resource. I mean, as a accountable resource. It will be an exempt resource and it won't count towards the $2,000 threshold. I am not suggesting that you leave the home in Joey's individual name because there's downside to Joey owning the home. One might be if Joey can no longer live in the home and he has to be placed in something else that has more supporting care, he no longer is residing in the home and it's going to immediately disqualify him from public benefits. So that's one. Two, Medicaid gets to attach a lien on the home for every dollar it spends for Joey. So after Joey passes away or no longer resides in the home and the home has to be sold, Medicaid's going to get reimbursed for all the money it's expended for Joey. So ideally, I would not recommend leaving a home to Joey individually. Later on, I will talk about how leaving the home in the special needs trust for Joey would be a better option because Medicaid won't be able to attach a lien to it if it's the right kind of special needs trust. Household goods, this is the clothes, furniture, the iPad, things that don't have title, altogether worth no more than $2,000 in market value. It's truly an exempt resource. And the list I'm going through right now, and once I'm finished with the list, those are the only exemptions. So if I don't say it, it's an accountable resource counting towards the $2,000 threshold test. Even though they don't really focus a lot on the household goods, it's technically there as an exemption up to $2,000. But it's hard to prove who owns the iPad. So they don't really kind of focus on it. A prepaid funeral or burial space, those are all exempt resources. An automobile is completely, the entire value of the vehicle is excluded if it's necessary for employment or medical treatment, or needs to be modified somehow for the transportation of the handicapped individual, or is necessary to perform essential daily activities. If it doesn't fall into that category, then a vehicle is excluded, but only if its current market value does not exceed $4,500. So it's not a, it doesn't take much for a car to be valued at $4,500. So if it doesn't fall into those necessities I just highlighted above, then most likely a vehicle could cause disruption or disqualification for public benefit eligibility. Life insurance policies that are owned by Joey cannot have a cash value, surrender value of more than $1,500. And any term life insurance that is owned by Joey will be excluded as well, because term life insurance policies don't have any cash value. They have death benefits, but they don't have cash value. It's an exempt resource. It's not one I see that often, that Joey owns the policy, but nonetheless, I wanted to highlight every single exempt resource out there. The next two are an ABLE account, as long as there's not more than $100,000 in it, and assets in a properly drafted special needs trust with no limit as to the amount. Those are the types of exempt resources. Before I move on, I just want to see if anyone has any questions at this time.
I really hope I did answer this one correctly, because we tell this to parents all the time. The parents are the legal guardians, but that kiddo turned 18. Now, the parents may have resources, but our understanding and what we share with the parents is that the short answer is no, that, that the SSA really kind of looks at your child as their own individual. And as long as the parents' income and resources is not in the child's name, right? It's all the parents' income, parents' resources. They will treat that child as their own individual, even if the parents are the legal guardians. But again, I think you probably are going to speak more to this.
Well, I'm going to talk about it right now. You're absolutely
bravo.
right. You're absolutely right. When I say 18 is the magic number, no other factor is a factor. The legal guardian, not legal guardian, financial dependent on your tax returns, none of it matters. It is just it's one of the few black and white rules in all of this complex area. It's 18 and the parents' resources are completely cut off.
I do think there's like a 30-day waiting period, right? Don't you typically wait about 30 days? Now, we encourage parents to start filling out some applications and things like that a little bit earlier. That's okay, but because there is kind of some time, but so yeah. I'm comfortable answering some questions, but having you kind of check my work, as it were. That's okay.
You did it. You did it. Great.
Okay, wonderful.
All of those. I guess there's another one.
There are a few more. Yeah.
Does a testamentary special needs trust need to be reported to SSA when applying for SSI? And my answer to that question is no, because that special needs trust is not an actual legal or active trust until the death and until it's funded. Once a special needs trust is activated, whether during your lifetime or at death, that's what testamentary means, created at death, that's when you have to disclose that there is a special needs trust. Will there be any information on the Ticket to Work program? My son qualified for Medicaid due to his income However, when I completed his taxes due to an inherited IRA that he cashed out, he was about $2,000 over the income limitation. I have reported this information to the state and am worried that he will lose his health care coverage. He will be 26 in July and will no longer be eligible under my husband's insurance. Basically, income, and actually, it's a great. You know what? I will answer that question.
Okay.
My next slide is going to
Okay.
talk about income, and unfortunately, you're not going to like my answer because income, no matter where it's coming from, is income. Um,
Mhm.
and the question it's really going towards is it's going to impact potentially temporarily short term until you potentially spend down. But remember
Well,
the
but that's
Medicaid.
where able accounts, that's kind of where you can be smart about where the income is put, right?
Yes,
Right, like able accounts and things like this.
right. Remember, I'm going to go back for a second and I'm going to say, remember, you have to pass the resource test to unlock the door.
Right.
And then the income test is looked at to see how wide the door is open.
Mm-hmm.
So in Medicaid purposes, and remember the resource test is the first day of the calendar month in which he applied, and then it's like kind of every month or every year you're looking at it. So someone that ends up getting assets that become a resource that exceed the threshold, there is a moment, there's a time where you can do something to make it exempt by, for example, spending it on legitimate things or buying a prepaid funeral or the easy button, put it in the ABLE account.
Mm-hmm.
Once
Mm-hmm.
you put it in the ABLE account, it's an
Mm-hmm.
exempt resource. By the time you get to the first day of the calendar month on the annual anniversary, you will be able to establish that there should be no loss of benefit.
Right.
That is different than what you're about to learn on the income rules. There is no $2,000 income limitation. That's a resource test. So I just want to make sure we're kind of clear on which test we're talking about and the thresholds for it. Yes, an ABLE account does need to be disclosed to SSI in the interview, but it should not
Impact.
impact the SSI. Also, 529 accounts affect this. Parents own and adult son as beneficiary. Um, yeah, 529 accounts. I went through the exhaustive list of exempt resources. And I had mentioned earlier, if I don't mention it, it's accountable resource. So the best way to think about it is 529 plans are an accountable resource. The good news is you might be able to roll over your 529 plan to an ABLE account that then makes it an exempt resource. So it's
And
very
I'll do a little plug if you don't mind, Vivek. Last month we met, we had a member from the state treasury's office here for our monthly workshop, which we can kind of get you more information about. And it was all about the MoAble accounts and she talked about exactly doing moving that 529 because you may realize that when your loved one's a little bit older, Joey's a little bit older, that maybe traditional college or something is not the plan, but you have been putting into that account for maybe 18 years or so. So just a little plug for last month's workshop.
yeah. Hey, I have a special needs trust for my adult Joey now, which is funded, and you also have a testamentary special needs trust. Who do I need to report this to? It currently earns no interest. Whether it earns interest or not is not relevant. You won't need to report the testamentary special needs trust since you're living and that trust is not funded, so it's not actually in existence. But the standalone special needs trust, which I'm calling standalone one, that is special need that exists, special needs trust that exists now that has assets in it, which is how I'm interpreting this question. And that does need to be disclosed in the application. If you've obtained it after the application or created it after the application, every year the renewal, you'll want to disclose it as well. You can proactively also contact Social Security and share it with them as well, but you're going to have to do it at the annual renewal anyways.